Custer, he's not just a man anymore. He wants more than just money or power.
He wants the map.
Her father broke her arm and forced her to beg at the streets until a cowboy drew his gun and changed her fate. Apache Junction, Arizona Territory, July 1883. Folks already called the crossroads Apache Junction, though the maps hadn't caught up yet. The sun here was a ruthless judge, its verdict delivered in blistering heat that cooked the very air. The town itself, a collection of sun-bleached wood and dust, felt less like a place and more like a graveyard for lost souls. Dusty, a man whose bones ached with more than just age, sat hunched against a weathered post outside the saloon, his right leg a constant, twitching reminder of a long-forgotten skirmish. He was a ghost haunting a land he no longer recognized, a cavalry scout haunted by the uniform he'd left behind, and the permanent scar on his soul, the memory of the Washita River massacre. The screams of the women and children, the smell of blood and smoke, were a wound that festered in the silence, louder than any drunken revelry. He had come to Apache Junction to find oblivion, to bury his past under layers of whiskey and grit, but oblivion was a luxury he couldn't afford. If you love Wild West love stories, flood the comments with 1 second, and your place, tell me where you're tuning in from. He counted his breaths the way a man counts the last coins in his pocket, feeling the rasp turn to a saw blade in his chest as the heat pressed down like a lid. Somewhere a fly ticked against a window pane, and the town clock coughed out a tired chime. The distance, no more than 100 feet, stretched absurdly long, like a rope he'd once held and then let slip while a good man fell. His palm, calloused and rough from years on a gun, was slick with a cold sweat that felt impossibly salty in the dry air. He knew his hands were shaking, a betraying tremor that had become more frequent of late, a physical manifestation of the constant, low-grade fear that had become his only companion. The world around him was a blur of sun-scorched colors, the dusty greens of saguaro and yucca, the pale yellow of mesquite bushes, the stark brown of the rocky hills, and he felt himself dissolving into it, becoming one with the landscape, just another piece of forgotten debris. But then he saw her, not walking, but tied to the weathered post that held the sign for Custer's Mining Company. A thick, coarse rope bit into the skin of her wrists, holding her fast, and her long black hair was braided with delicate turquoise beads. Her face, though young, held an old kind of wisdom. She was a daughter of the ND, the Western Apache people he had once been ordered to hunt, and the irony of it was a bitter taste in his mouth. Her elbow never set right. Her father had twisted it years ago to make her bow for coins outside mine offices. A tattered basket of hand-woven goods and intricately beaded jewelry lay at her feet, a stark contrast to her imprisonment. Dusty saw the way she flinched when a burly miner, his face a mask of drunken lust, shouted a lewd comment from the saloon door, but she didn't look away. Alara, about 20, kept her head held high, her eyes a shield against the ugliness of the world. He recognized that look. It was the look of a person who had been broken but still refused to shatter. A cold dread settled in his gut as he looked at the large storefront of Custer's Mining Company, a place whose very name made his blood run cold. He had served under Major Elias Custer, a man he knew to be a predator who fed on the innocent, a man who believed that honor was a weapon to be used against the weak. A few minutes later, Custer's bloated frame emerged from the storefront, holding a knife. He walked over to Alara, and with a single, sharp cut, he severed the rope. She fell to her knees, her wrists red and raw from the friction, but she didn't make a sound. Custer sneered, flicking a single coin at her feet. "Get on with it," he grunted, his voice a low growl. "Your father's debt won't pay itself." It was a scene Dusty had witnessed countless times, a powerful man preying on the powerless. But this time Dusty could not turn away. His personal code, the one thing that remained of his honor, demanded action. He finished his whiskey, the burn in his throat a welcome distraction from the inferno in his soul. He pushed himself off the post, his joints protesting with a dull ache, and began to walk. Every step was a commitment, a promise to himself and to the ghosts of his past. He was here to fight, He was here to atone. He approached the young woman, his presence a silent challenge to Custer's casual cruelty. The former major's eyes narrowed as he recognized Dusty. Well, if it's not Dusty Callahan, the cavalry's finest tracker, Custer sneered. Lost, are we, soldier? You're a long way from home. Dusty ignored him, his eyes fixed on the young woman. Are you all right, miss? He asked, his voice low and raspy. Ilara looked up, her dark eyes wide with surprise. I am fine, she said, her voice barely a whisper. She's my business, Callahan, Custer growled, stepping between them. And she knows her place. So why don't you do the same, and go back to that whiskey bottle you crawled out of? Dusty's gaze finally settled on Custer, and the look in his eyes was one of pure, unadulterated cold fury. She's a human being, Custer, he said, the words heavy with contempt. She's not your property. Custer's hand went for the pistol on his hip, but Dusty was faster. In a blur of motion, the Colt was in his hand, pointed directly at Custer's chest. The air went still. The sounds of the town faded into a distant hum. Dusty's hand was steady, his aim true. He had come to Apache Junction to forget, but now he realized he had come here to remember. Don't do it, Dusty, Custer said, his voice strained. She's not worth it. You wouldn't know what's worth it, Custer, Dusty replied, his voice a low growl. You never did. He lowered his gun just a fraction, a signal that he wasn't looking for a gunfight. Leave her alone, he said, and we won't have a problem. Custer backed down, the cowardice he had always possessed rising to the surface. He gave a sharp, derisive laugh, but his eyes held a glint of pure hatred. This isn't over, Callahan, he spat. You've just made yourself a target. Dusty holstered his gun, the metallic click echoing in the sudden silence. He turned back to Ilara, and for the first time, he saw her truly. Her eyes, filled with a mixture of fear and defiance, held a strength that matched his own. Come on, he said, gesturing to a path leading away from the saloon. We need to talk. Ilara hesitated, but then she followed him. As they walked away, the ghost of a smile touched Dusty's lips. He had found a cause worth dying for. He had found his honor again on a dusty street in a town of ghosts and broken dreams. The confrontation in Apache Junction was just a prelude. A few hours after leaving the town, the distinct sound of hoofbeats echoed through the canyons, a chorus of vengeance riding on the winds. Custer and his men were a pack of bloodhounds, their pursuit relentless. The Arizona sun, a relentless enemy in its own right, beat down on them, the temperature hovering near 100 Fahrenheit. Dusty and Ilara fled into the unforgiving landscape, the familiar red rock cliffs and deep arroyos of the Superstition Mountains offering a fragile, fleeting shield. The terrain, once a place of silent solitude for Dusty, was now a maze of desperate choices. They had no time to lose, and no time to process the seismic shift in their lives. The tension was a living thing between them, a tangible force built on unspoken words and shared fear. Ilara moved with a quiet dignity, her every footfall a testament to her deep connection to this land. Dusty, for all his experience, was a stranger here, guided by a past he desperately wanted to forget. Dusty's past as a cavalry scout served them well. He led them through a network of hidden trails he'd learned during the Apache Wars, the very trails that had haunted his dreams for years. It was a cruel irony, using the knowledge he'd gained in a war of annihilation to save a young woman he should have protected back then. They moved like shadows, eating what they could forage and sleeping under the cold, indifferent stars. Ilara, despite her quiet nature, proved to be an invaluable companion. She moved with the grace of a woman who was at home in this land, her footsteps silent, her eyes constantly scanning for danger. She knew the plants and the animals, her knowledge of survival innate and deeply ingrained. She was a daughter of this land, a woman who had learned its secrets from birth. Her people, the ND, had lived here for centuries, their stories and traditions etched into the very stones they walked on. She showed Dusty how to find water in the most unlikely of places, a skill he had never learned in the cavalry. She pointed out the telltale signs of a nearby spring, a small patch of green moss on a sun-scorched rock, a subtle shift in the wind that carried the scent of moisture. She was a living map, a guide to a world he had only ever seen as a place of conflict. They skirted a wash veined with pale clay where quail stitched their small commas in the dust. Ilara crouched, touched 2 pebbles as if setting pieces on a board only she could see, then pointed to a scrim of cloud building to the south. "Monsoon, soon," she said. "Smell." He did wet stone, Green's memory, and felt a shame so clean, it almost cooled him. All the years he'd read sign to corner families, while she read it to keep families alive. One evening, as they rested near a small spring, Dusty finally broke the silence that had grown between them. He felt a deep need to be honest with her, to lay his soul bare. "Custer, he's not just a man anymore," Dusty said, his voice raspy from the dust and exhaustion. "He's a sickness. He wants more than just money or power. He wants to wipe out what he can't control." Ilara looked at him, her dark eyes thoughtful. "He wants the map," she said, her voice a low murmur. "The map to our sacred gold mine, the Golden Canyon." The revelation hit Dusty like a physical blow. He had seen the way Custer had looked at her basket, the way he had tossed the coin with such disdain. It wasn't about the craft work. It was about something more, something hidden. He had been a tracker, a man who saw the world in patterns and signs. But this was a new layer of complexity, a new kind of hunt. Ilara's revelation gave Custer's actions a new, more sinister meaning. He was not just a greedy man, he was a monster who sought to destroy an entire people for his own gain. "My father gave it to me," she continued, her voice filled with a profound sadness. "Before they killed him, he said it was our last hope, the last piece of our world that we could truly call our own. We were to protect it from men like him." The weight of the responsibility was palpable in her voice. She was a young woman, and she had been burdened with the fate of her entire people. She was a guardian, a custodian of a past that was slipping away, a future that was being stolen. Dusty's jaw tightened. He knew about the sacred mines, the places of spiritual and cultural significance that had been desecrated by prospectors. The greed of the white man had turned holy ground into a battlefield. "He told me it was my responsibility," Ilara said, a single tear tracing a path through the dust on her cheek. "But I don't know how to protect it. I'm just a woman." "You are more than that," Dusty said, his voice firm. "You're a guardian, and you're not alone." The words, so simple, were filled with a lifetime of promises and a newfound purpose. He had been a man of solitude, a man who had shunned all human connection. But now, in the heart of this wild and dangerous landscape, he was a protector, a partner in a fight for something greater than himself. By late afternoon, the superstitions rose like a bruise against the sky, purple at the edges. Ilara pointed with 2 fingers, teaching him the wind's grammar, the way a vulture's tilt meant carrion water, the way a line of ants meant seep and shade, and he realized with a small ache that he'd learned trails as a weapon, while she had learned them as a prayer. The night brought a different kind of beauty, a cool, quiet stillness that was a welcome change from the day's brutal heat. The coyote's howl echoed through the canyons, a lonely cry that was both mournful and wild. The Big Dipper, a familiar sight in the star-studded sky, seemed to be a guiding light, a silent promise of a way forward. The next day, as they climbed a steep, rocky pass near the Seven Sisters, a row of Hoodoo's locals had named Custer's men finally caught up. The ambush was brutal and swift. A hail of bullets rained down on them from the high cliffs. Dusty shoved Ilara behind a large boulder, his body a human shield. A bullet tore through his right thigh, a searing, hot jolt of pain that sent a wave of nausea through him. He gritted his teeth, returning fire with a practiced ease, his aim deadly and precise. But they were outnumbered, and the odds were stacked against them. He heard the telltale click of an empty chamber and cursed. Custer's men were closing in, their shouts of victory echoing through the canyon. Dusty grabbed Ilara's hand, his voice strained with pain. "Run," he said, his eyes filled with a desperate plea. "Don't let them get the map." But Ilara shook her head, her face a mask of fierce determination. She had seen him get shot, and she was not about to abandon him. She was not like the others who had let him down in the past. She was a woman of the desert, a woman of her people, and her loyalty was as strong as the ancient rocks around them. She looked at his bleeding leg and then at the enemy, her mind working furiously. She was a guardian, not a victim, and it was time to prove it. She scrambled to a small overhang, her fingers finding purchase in the rough rock face. She was small and agile, and the men pursuing them were large and clumsy. Dusty watched in amazement as she scaled the cliff face, the very picture of defiance. She was a wildcat, a force of nature. She was not just a woman, she was a warrior. She reached the top and, with a shout that was a mix of triumph and rage, she pushed a large pile of loose rocks and stones down onto the men below. A shower of deadly missiles rained down on their heads, scattering them in panic. Taking advantage of the chaos, Alara returned to Dusty's side, her face streaked with dust and triumph. She ripped a piece of cloth from her dress and wrapped it tightly around his leg, using her knowledge of the medicinal plants to stop the bleeding. "You are not dying here," she said, her voice filled with a fierce conviction. "We will get to the mine. We will be safe." Dusty looked at her, and for the first time, he saw not just a victim he had to save, but a partner in a fight for something greater than either of them. The pain in his leg was still there, but it was overshadowed by a new feeling: hope. Hope that they could win, hope that they could find peace, and hope that he could finally atone for the sins of his past. The wound was a relentless fire in his right thigh, a constant, searing reminder of their precarious existence. Alara had cleaned and bandaged it with a poultice of chewed herbs, but the infection had set in, turning his skin hot and his mind to a fog of fever dreams. They had found refuge in a secluded cave high in the mountains, a place known to her people as the Whispering Cave. The name was a fitting one, as the wind that whistled through the narrow opening sounded like the endless murmurs of ghosts. For Dusty, the ghosts were not just in the wind, they were in his mind, a constant parade of the fallen. The fever had taken hold, and the world had become a distorted, surreal landscape, where the past and present blurred into a single, agonizing reality. He drifted in and out of consciousness, his body trembling, his throat dry. The smell of the herbs Alara had used to dress his wound was a constant, earthy presence, a faint hope in the midst of his despair. In his dreams, he was back in the cavalry, his face streaked with mud and powder smoke, his heart pounding with the rush of the charge. He saw the faces of the Ndi women and children, their eyes wide with fear, their pleas echoing in the silence. He saw his younger self, a man who believed in the righteousness of his cause, a man who had yet to learn the true meaning of honor. The past was a heavy shroud, suffocating him, drowning him in a sea of guilt. The sound of the wind was a phantom chorus, a ghostly echo of the screams he had heard so long ago. Every ragged breath was a struggle, every heartbeat a drumbeat of regret. He was a prisoner in his own mind, trapped by the memories of a life he had once been proud of, and now he was a captive in a cave, his life in the hands of a young woman whose people he had once been ordered to kill. Time puddled and dried in him. He dreamed of a flag he could not fold, of a chaplain without a face, of a woman's braid cut and coiled like a sleeping snake. The beads rolled again, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and would not stop humming. He tried to say sorry, and his tongue was a strip of leather. The cave's flute note thinned, then widened, until it sounded like wind through cavalry guidons on a parade ground that had never been consecrated and never would be. When he finally woke, the fever had broken, and Alara was sitting beside him, her hand on his forehead, her eyes filled with a deep, sorrowful compassion. He saw his own shame reflected in her eyes, the shame of a man who had once been a part of the very system that had caused her people so much pain. The pain in his leg was still there, but it was a dull ache now, a manageable discomfort. He looked at her, and a feeling of profound gratitude, so foreign to his soul, washed over him. "I need to tell you something," Dusty said, his voice a hoarse whisper. "I need you to know who I am." Alara shook her head. "I know who you are. You are the man who saved me." "No," he insisted, his voice trembling with the weight of the confession. "I was a cavalry scout. I was there at the Washita River in 2068. I told myself it was duty. It was murder. The words tumbled out, a torrent of guilt and regret that had been building for years. I was told it was for the good of the country, for manifest destiny, for progress, but it was just murder. His voice broke, and he turned his head away, unable to look at her. Your father, I may have seen him. In one of the raids. I don't know if I was the one who, but I was there. I was a part of it. The confession was a physical release, a weight lifted from his shoulders, but it was also a moment of terrifying vulnerability. He had confessed his greatest sin to the person who had the most right to hate him. The silence in the cave was deafening. The only sound was the whispering wind, a ghostly echo of his confession. Alara was still, her face an unreadable mask. Dusty waited for the anger, the hatred, the condemnation. He waited for her to walk away, to leave him to die alone. It was what he deserved. It was what he had been running from. But instead, Alara reached out and took his hand, her touch gentle but firm. I know, she said, her voice soft but firm. I knew it when I first saw you. I saw the sorrow in your eyes. I saw the ghosts in your heart. You carry the pain of my people, the pain of what was done to us. You are not a monster. You are a man who has lived with a heavy burden. And you have come here, to this place, to atone for it. Dusty looked at her, and a single tear escaped his eye, tracing a path through the dust on his cheek. Her forgiveness, so freely given, was a balm to his shattered soul. It was a gift he didn't deserve, but it was a gift that he desperately needed. In that moment, he knew he had to do more than just survive. He had to honor her people. He had to protect their heritage. He had to make things right. What do we do? He asked, his voice now filled with a new resolve. We can't outrun him forever. He's a bloodhound. He's always a step behind. Alara looked at him, her eyes shining with a new light. We stop running, she said. We use what we know. We use this place. We use the mountains, the wind, the sun. We use the knowledge of my ancestors to fight your enemy. This is our home. This is our land. He is a trespasser. He has nowhere to go. Her words were a call to arms, a declaration of war. She was not just a young woman. She was a warrior, and she was ready to fight. Dusty looked around the cave, seeing it not as a hiding place, but as a fortress. The high cliffs, the narrow passes, the treacherous terrain, it was all a part of their plan. He had been so focused on running from his past that he had failed to see that the very land that had witnessed his shame could be the key to his redemption. Ilara's courage was a beacon of light in the darkness, a testament to the resilience of her people. He had come here to hide, but he had found something far more valuable, a cause, a partner, and a chance to finally live with honor. He had faced death countless times, but he had never faced a moral dilemma this profound. The past was a wound that had festered for years, but now he had the chance to heal it. With Alara's forgiveness and her wisdom as his guide, he was ready to face the world again. He was ready to face Custer. He was ready to face his own ghosts. And this time, he was not running. He was fighting. He was fighting for a chance at a new life, for a chance to be worthy of the trust Alara had placed in him. The wound was healing, a tight, burning sensation in his right thigh that was a physical testament to the journey he had taken. Dusty was no longer a man running from his past. He was a man preparing for a future. The cave had become their headquarters, a place of sanctuary and strategy. Alara had become more than just a companion. She was his co-conspirator, his equal. She knew the land with an intimacy that Dusty, for all his training, could only marvel at. She taught him how to read the wind, how to listen for the whispers of the mountains, and how to use the ancient paths of her ancestors to their advantage. He, in turn, taught her how to handle a rifle, how to read a man's intentions in his eyes, and how to fight with the cold, calculated precision of a soldier. Their partnership was a beautiful and brutal dance of cultures, a fusion of old-world wisdom and new-world grit. One morning, while scouting the canyon rim, they saw them. Custer and his men were a distant stain on the horizon, their movements methodical, their purpose clear. They were hunting, and they were closing in. Custer, a man consumed by his own arrogance, had underestimated them. He thought he was hunting a desperate man and a frightened woman. He didn't know he was hunting a warrior and her protector. He didn't know he was hunting a new kind of justice. "They'll be here by sundown," Dusty said, his voice low and calm. "We have to be ready." Ilara nodded, her face a mask of fierce determination. They will not get the map. They will not desecrate the sacred ground. Their plan was simple, and in its simplicity lay its genius. They would not meet Custer head-on. They would use the land itself as their weapon. They would lure him into a trap, a place where his brute force and arrogance would be his undoing. They would lead him to the Devil's Pass, a treacherous canyon with narrow ledges and a sheer drop of over 500 feet, a place where only the foolhardy and the brave would dare to tread. They split up, Ilara moving like a ghost through the landscape, her knowledge of the hidden paths allowing her to navigate the treacherous terrain with ease. She climbed the steep, rocky incline with the grace of a mountain goat, her hands and feet finding purchase where Dusty could only see a sheer rock face. She was in her element, a part of the wind and the sun and the dust. Dusty, in turn, moved with the measured gait of a man who knew every rock and every shadow. The old ache in his right thigh flared with every step, a constant, sharp pain that he now embraced. It was a physical reminder that he was alive, that he was fighting, that he was not running anymore. The smell of the hot, sun-baked stone filled his nostrils, a raw, primal scent that was a part of this ancient land. He had made his peace with his past, and in doing so, he had found a new kind of strength. He was no longer running. He was waiting. He found the perfect spot, a high ledge overlooking the Devil's Pass. It was a place where a single man could hold off an army, a place of honor and death. As he waited, he reflected on the man he had been, and the man he had become. The cavalry uniform was gone, replaced by the simple, worn-out clothes of a man who had nothing left to lose. But in his heart, he was more of a soldier now than he had ever been. He was a soldier for honor, for justice, for love. He counted ammunition 12 in the tube, 5 on the belt, 1 rattling loose in the pocket where he kept a priest's medal he didn't believe in. Wind quartering left to right, sun angling down the canyon lip so the first shots would blind the riders for 3 heartbeats, maybe 4. He spat grit, rolled his shoulder to listen for the old pop, and pictured Ilara above him with the pry bar and the wedge of shale they'd set before dawn. The land itself would speak first. He heard the first sounds of Custer's approach, a cacophony of hoofbeats and the shouting of men. Custer, a man who had always been too loud, was leading the charge, his ego driving him forward. Dusty took a deep breath, the desert air filling his lungs, and he raised his rifle. His heart was pounding, not with fear, but with a fierce, burning resolve. The pain in his leg was a dull roar, but he ignored it, his focus absolute. Then he heard it. Custer's voice, a triumphant roar. "Callahan, you can't hide forever." Dusty didn't respond. He just waited. He waited for them to enter the pass, to be in the perfect position. When they did, a torrent of rocks, dislodged by Ilara from a higher ledge, rained down on them. Custer's men scattered in panic, their horses screaming in fear. The chaos was a symphony of vengeance, a song that had been a long time in the making. Dusty began to fire, his shots clean and precise, picking off the men one by one. He thumbed fresh rounds into the loading gate, never taking his eye off the pass. He had 12 rounds in his rifle, and he knew he had to make every one count. He aimed for the legs, for the shoulders, for any part of a man that would make him fall. The distance was about 60 to 80 yards, a manageable range for a marksman of his caliber. He was a ghost in the canyon, a vengeful spirit of the land he had once been sent to conquer. He was not just fighting for his life, he was fighting for a people, for a way of life, for a past that had been stolen. He could feel the wind shift, a sudden gust that would throw off his aim, but he adjusted instinctively, a part of the land, a part of the fight. The echoes did strange math, 1 shot into 3, 3 into many, and the horse's panic wrote zigzags on the shale. Dusty kept his cadence. Breathe, sight, press never yank and let the recoil be a metronome. Twice he waited out the wind, once he let it take the round a hand's width and was grateful. A man dropped, clutching his shoulder instead of tumbling clean into the abyss. Mercy wasn't the plan, but it kept arriving anyway, stubborn as mesquite. When the dust settled, only a few of Custer's men remained, and they were quickly dispatched. And then there was just Custer, his face a mask of fury and desperation. He was alone, his men gone, his plan in tatters. He looked at Dusty, and in his eyes, Dusty saw the same arrogance and cruelty he had seen on the battlefield. Custer was a man who had never accepted defeat. "You're a traitor, Callahan," Custer spat, his voice filled with hatred. "You're a damn traitor to your own people." "My people are the ones who fight for what's right, Custer," Dusty said, his voice cold. "My people are the ones who don't hide behind a uniform and kill innocent women and children. That's your legacy, Custer. It's not mine." Then, Custer revealed the truth. "They blamed me for the massacre at the Washita River," he said, his voice shaking with rage. "But you were the one who saw it, Callahan. You were the one who saw everything. You just didn't have the guts to say it." The words were a revelation, a puzzle piece that fit perfectly into the mosaic of Dusty's nightmares. It was Custer's treachery, his brutal, unnecessary violence, that had stained Dusty's soul, that had forced him to live a life of regret. "I didn't have the guts to speak up then," Dusty said, his eyes hard as flint, "but I have the guts now." Dusty measured the space between them 8 paces on bad rock, the kind that slips a man into the canyon's mouth, and thought of every time he had looked away. He stepped in on the beat of his own name, Callahan, let the first swing whistle past his ear like a hornet, and set his weight the way an old sergeant once taught him. Knees soft, heart hard, hands honest. Custer lunged, his desperation a final, fatal mistake. Dusty met him head on, their fists flying, their bodies a blur of motion. It was a brutal, no-holds-barred brawl, a clash of 2 men who had once been on the same side, and now represented 2 different worlds. Dusty fought with the cold, calculated precision of a soldier. Custer fought with the wild, desperate rage of a cornered animal. In the end, it was Dusty's honor that won out. He landed a final crushing blow, and Custer fell to the ground, defeated. He was a defeated man, stripped of his power, his wealth, and his dignity. As the sun set over the canyon, painting the sky in a blaze of orange and red, Dusty stood over Custer, his chest heaving with exertion. He had won. He had won not just for himself, but for Ilara and for the ghosts of the past. He had finally atoned for his sins. He was a free man. Ilara came to him, her face filled with a mixture of pride and relief. She looked at Custer, her eyes cold. "He will not have the mine," she said. Dusty nodded. "Number he won't." He took Ilara's hand in his, and together they walked towards the setting sun. The past was behind them, a dark cloud that had finally dissipated. The future was ahead, a new horizon, a new beginning. The sun was a painter's masterpiece, streaking the sky in shades of orange and violet as Dusty and Ilara made their way back to the Whispering Cave. The silence between them was no longer one of tension but of profound peace, a shared understanding that words could not capture. Custer was defeated, his empire of greed and cruelty crumbling without its brutal architect. The sacred gold mine remained a secret, a sanctuary for a people who had lost so much. But the true treasure they had found was not in the earth, it was in the honor and love they had forged in the crucible of conflict. Dusty, a man who had lived his life as a ghost, now felt his soul anchored to the world, to the woman walking beside him. The weight of his past had not vanished, but it had been transformed into a new kind of strength. He had faced his demons, and in doing so, he had earned the right to stand tall. They stood at the entrance of the cave, looking out at the vast expanse of the canyon. The wind, once a chorus of ghosts, now sang a song of freedom. Ilara held her father's map in her hand, the faded lines and symbols a promise of a future she could finally choose for herself. "What will you do now?" Dusty asked, his voice low. 12 to start," she said, her voice filled with a quiet passion. "Maybe 15 by winter. We will build a small schoolhouse, perhaps with a thatched roof and walls of clay. There, we will teach the old words and the new laws. We will teach our children how to stitch moccasins with the old patterns and how to sign a contract no white man can twist. We will keep baskets and ledgers side by side. Her vision was a beacon of hope in a world of darkness. She had taken the pain of her past and transformed it into a force for good. She was not just a survivor, she was a creator. The raw courage of a Wild West love story was in her soul. She had found a purpose, a mission, a reason to live that went far beyond mere survival. She envisioned a small garden for medicinal plants, a place where the elders could pass on their knowledge to the young. It would be a place of healing, a place where old wounds could begin to mend, where the laughter of children would echo in the canyons, a sound far more precious than any gold. "And what about you?" she asked, turning to him, her eyes searching his. "What will you do?" Dusty looked out at the horizon, at the endless expanse of the desert he had once used as a hiding place. He thought about the man he had been, a man running from his sins, and the man he had become, a man who had faced his demons and emerged victorious. He had found his honor again, a true cowboy love story, and he had found a kind of peace he never thought possible. The scar on his right thigh was no longer a symbol of pain, but a badge of honor, a reminder of the fight he had won. He was a free man, a man who had finally atoned for his past. The weight that had been on his shoulders for so long was gone, replaced by a sense of light and purpose. "I have no home," he said, his voice a whisper. "I have no people. I'm just a man with a gun and a scar." The words were a statement of fact, not a complaint. He had lived a life of solitude, and he was comfortable with it. Ilara reached out and took his hand, her touch gentle but firm. "You have a home here," she said. "With me, with my people. The canyon is your home. My heart is your home." She was offering him something he had never dared to dream of, a family, a purpose, a future, a true Western love. Dusty looked at her, and his eyes filled with a raw, powerful emotion that he hadn't felt in years. He saw in her eyes a future, not of solitude and regret, but of companionship and purpose. The desert had always been a lonely place for him, a place of silent suffering, but with her it was a place of endless possibility, a place of healing, a true Western love story. They had found in each other a solace and a strength that transcended race and time, a testament to the enduring power of love and redemption. A single eagle circled high above them, a beautiful, silent omen, making 3 slow, deliberate circles before disappearing into the setting sun. The setting sun cast their shadows long on the canyon floor. 2 souls, once broken by a violent past, now stood on the precipice of a hopeful future. The journey from Apache Junction to this moment had been long and treacherous. They had a home, a mission, and each other, but the open road beckoned. A new adventure, a new chapter. The wind in the canyon had sung them a song of peace, but the wide open space of the frontier was calling. The next morning, as the sun peeked over the canyon rim, a lone horseman and a woman in a woven shirt rode away from the whispering cave, their silhouettes small against the vast, empty sky. Their destination was unknown, their future uncertain. But for the first time in a long time, they were not running from anything. They were riding towards something, something new, something full of hope. The wind was at their backs, a whisper of a promise, a gentle push toward the wide, open world. This Western love story was far from over. Today's story is about pains that seemed to have no way out until a small ray of light changed everything. Do you believe that, even in the darkest times, there's always a miracle waiting at the end of the road? And if deep down you still believe that God is watching over you, quietly arranging everything, then right now, leave a comment, Amen, below this video. Because who knows, at the very moment you write it, a blessing may quietly find its way into your life.